here you have an overview of the major Jewish holidays. So you can see that the most important period are the high holy days. This is a 10-day period that comes in the fall. It begins with Rosh Hashanah, which literally means the new year. So on the first day of the seventh month, the new year for counting the number of years since creation, according to Jewish tradition, begins with Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah is, although the blasts on the shofar, the ram's horn that's used on that day, are described in the biblical text, it's not really called a new year, and it's really not understood to be the anniversary of the creation of the world in the way that it comes to be understood later. So this is an anniversary of the creation of the world that takes place on this new year. And then there's 10 days of kind of heightened holiness, heightened introspection, and it ends with Yom Kippur. It ends with the Jewish Day of Atonement. And so there's an idea that during this time period, God is writing names into what's called the Book of Life. And so this is actually how God passes judgment, that for one thing, God judges every single year. And this judgment has to do with who's going to live or die in the upcoming year. And so those who are to live have their names written into the Book of Life again. So there's a sense that then judgment and atonement, of course, are really deeply connected, and that atoning properly has to do with having one's name written once again into the Book of Life for the upcoming year, and that during this time period in particular, Jews can really affect God's decision. Repentance is possible all year long, but this is a particularly introspective time when people are thinking about, again, an ethical and ritual relationship with God, but also an ethical and ritual relationship with other humans. And so traditionally, many Jews during this time period will apologize to other people because repentance rights them with God, but there's really an understanding with Judaism that that's not sufficient for ethics, that justice has to be done on earth. One has to apologize. Ideally, if one can, one will make it better. But that may be hard or impossible to do. And so at least an apology is necessary. So then there is Yom Kippur. It's a fast day. It's a 24-hour fast, meaning that people from sundown to sundown, people don't have water, don't have any food, don't have any cigarettes, don't have any sex. Appetites go together. And there's really extensive liturgy that is performed in the synagogue. So if there's one day out of the year that Jews are going to go to synagogue, it's definitely going to be for Yom Kippur. It's the most important day in the synagogue. Passover is celebrated, I would say, even more by a long shot, but Passover is the most important day in the home, that most of Passover rituals are about the home. And that's part of why it can be celebrated so widely, because people who have a kind of alienated relationship with a synagogue or who don't have one, those kinds of things, you don't need that for Passover. But Yom Kippur, you have to be there as a community. So Yom Kippur is a liturgy that goes through alphabetically in a couple series of recitations of sins. And so Jews will pound their fist on their chest as they're confessing their sins. But no one has to sort of, like, it's not like you have to stand up and you're like, I did gluttony this year. You know, it's not that. Rather, the liturgy means that the whole community stands together and says, you know, we've been jealous, we've been gluttonous, all these different sins. And so in that first person plural, the we, means no one has to stand alone in their confession of sins. And there's a sense that everyone implicitly, that everyone is responsible for each other, really kind of including each other's sins. And so it creates an idea that Jews are responsible for each other, not just to take care of each other, but also to help each other keep the covenant and not to sin. Um, and so that's really written into the very words, as well as, again, the use of the first person plural. No one has to stand alone before God and say, I did this, but rather the whole community does it together. We did this. So as a holy day, it's one that's really central, right? That we might say, why have a day of atonement if you can do repentance anytime? And I think one of the really important things is to see that, how to put it, it's so hard to know that you've done enough repentance. That when repentance is no longer a sacrifice in the temple, there's a question of, have I done enough to make up for the mistakes I've made this year? Another aspect is that we could have committed sins and not remember them, right? We've all done things that we forgot about. We may not even realize the way that we hurt other people. And so one of the most popular aspects of the Yom Kippur liturgy is a prayer called Kol Nidre. And I'll post a video of Neil Diamond singing the Kol Nidre um, liturgy from a remake of the movie The Jazz Singer. And this song, this prayer, Kol Nidre, says Jews are not responsible for any promises they made in the previous year. So it's been used against Jews, and actually really early on, rabbis opposed it for a fear that that would happen, to say you can't trust Jews. That's certainly not the role that it actually plays for people's lives. That rather, why is it so popular? First of all, I think the kind of haunting of not knowing if you've done sufficient repentance is so important. But second of all, it's just a beautiful melody. And it's very moving for many people. And so that's part of why I want to post a clip of it at all, to give you any kind of sense of what this would look like, that it's also just experientially really popular. And so actually for Reform Judaism, by the logic of Reform, Yom Kippur, or at least Kol Nidre, really wouldn't be necessary. But it's too popular that for those Reform rabbis who tried to cut it out, people didn't like that. And so really quickly, it was put back into the liturgy. That was not a way that it was acceptable to make the liturgy shorter.